which has actually been refreshed from QCF to RQF. And that means, in just layman terms, is that what has happened is, in this qualification there are two things which have happened. One is the qualification has become graded. That means you are able to not just score a pass, but you can also go and achieve merit and distinction. And the second bit, which is in terms of the major change within the qualification, is that apart from the naming, the diploma is a 60 credit. The extended diploma both of you are enrolled in is 120 credits. So this qualification also has now pathways. That means at some stage when we cover the mandatory units, what we will be able to do is, depending on which area you want to look at specializing in, or probably look at going further, you will then be able to also look at choosing pathways like finance, marketing. These are all available on the Moodle, but I'm just pulling up a quick document just to refresh why we are looking at this. So there are pathways like finance, operations, marketing, and obviously managing people, leading towards HR. And those are things that we can discuss as we go along, because you would choose different units, and these different optional units would help you move into that particular pathway, and we can then explain a bit of mapping to you of which optional units lead to kind of which pathway. So on the system, basically just to look at the accessing of the data, what you will see is that what we've done is we are going to try and cover the mandatory units first, and those are the ones that have been organized on the top. And then towards the end, what we've done is we put all the optional units, and some of these optional units will also have data populated, as we go along into the units, while we study this course from now on till, say, April, May next year. So I think first come first, what we're looking at today doing is basically just starting off with the first unit, which is organization behavior. And this is one of the mandatory units that, irrespective of the pathway that you choose, you have to cover. And I'm going to be looking at, obviously discussing and giving you an overview of this particular unit. There are some basic bits and pieces that are already uploaded onto the Moodle, which you can obviously access and see. Mohammed, I'll sort this out for you a bit later after the session, so that you have your logins to play today or tomorrow morning. But hopefully you should be able to have it sooner than later today, or maybe maximum tomorrow morning. Now, in terms of the coverage, that's great. So in terms of the coverage of the unit, what I'm going to do is basically look at just the overview first. And
actually, when you are doing movement on your screen, then I am having some distortion in voice. So it will be, if you can do one.
Right, okay, that's fine. So what I'll try and do is, obviously I've got all the documents open now. I know in some places, obviously the connectivity sometimes is a bit bad. That's why I've not switched on the camera, because it will probably mean more bandwidth, but I'll try and restrict the movement of the documents as much as possible. Now, there are two things that you will obviously see when we cover a unit. We refer to as teachers, this document. One of them is called the unit specification, and this unit specification is also available on Moodle. And I'm going to be looking at this as a key document when I look at delivery of teaching, is because we are going to try and cover all the learning outcomes one by one, and these learning outcomes that we cover will have corresponding presentations for you to look at. And at some stage, what I'm going to also do is send you some specific handouts which will relate to each of the tasks, and that will form some sort of additional reading that you would need to do. And if you're looking at doing some independent research and obviously looking at higher grade descriptors like merit and distinction, then my suggestion would be that you'll have to also dip in to reading the ebook to get some more in-depth analysis about the topics and also the tasks which are there. So let's start up today with just the overview of the unit, and just briefly looking at why is this unit important at the management level, in level 6 and 7, and how does it help students or probably learners when they are looking at doing this master's qualification, which is diploma in strategic management. Now, as you know, that most of us work within at some stage when we start our careers, or when we start a job, we always work within some sort of a business or an organization, and it becomes important for us to clearly understand how organizations work, and sometimes we also need to understand the behavior of individuals, their attitude, the culture of the organization in particular, the structure of the organization or the business in particular, to be able to effectively align ourselves with regards to working within the company or within that job role that we've been assigned. So this unit then has a direct bearing on you being able to understand the type of organization you want to join, whether it aligns with objectives, aims, and aspirations. And also, this unit will help you in understanding, what are the key things that you need to know when you join a particular type of organization, how it functions, how you align yourself with those functions or people that work within the organization, and how do you develop a rapport, develop networking, and also how behaviors, when I say individual behavior, you might different type of people showing different type of behaviors. Some of them are quite assertive, some of them are quite passive. So these are things that will help you to understand, how to work within an organization, how to work within the organization to work your way up. That means to get promotions, and also how to deal with people, with different types of people within the organization. And those are the pieces that we will look at studying within this particular unit. Now, the other aspect that, why this unit we need to study also from an journal implication point of view is that when we work, when we either in our personal or professional lives, whether we work or, whether we are self-employed or you work from home, sometimes you get to see that the structures of the organization also have a direct bearing on how work is done, how quickly the work is done, or how delegation of work or roles and responsibilities work within the organization. So one of the key things that we also need to look at when we study organization and behavior of individuals within the organization, we will also study how culture and structure are formed and how they are different in different organizations, and how the culture and the structure of the organization creates effective, creates delivery of output, or, in terms of productivity, and how effectiveness can be brought into the organization when you have a certain type of structure, or, you have certain types of individuals working within a certain type of structure. At the end, what we are looking at doing and studying from this unit would be to try and understand how, once you've joined a company or joined a business, organization, interchangeable words that we use, at some stage, what we need to be able to do is, because we work within that organization, say, 9 to 5, or, across the year, weeks and months, how does the organization take care of the individual? What kind of opportunities does it provide? How does it motivate you? How does it give you areas which will keep your work challenging and keep you motivated to work within the organization? So we look at certain aspects of understanding within a business, or when we take up examples, is that how is it going to be effective for the students, for example, in this case, for the employees, in this case, to be able to work, be motivated, and also move along with the organization in an aspect of completing tasks given and roles and responsibilities assigned. And also, at the end of it, when you do this as a job, you have something which is job satisfaction. So all these different parameters, variables, is what we are going to try and understand by looking at studying this unit, at the master's level, is because you're going to be dealing with people, you're going to be dealing with managers, leaders, and in certain situations, you have to step into their roles. And when you are in that particular role of a manager or a leader or a supervisor, how do you work within the organization, delegate work, how do you structure things, and how do you motivate your employees or your team members to be able to deliver a certain task? And that is what the objective of studying this particular unit is, from a point of view of the program. Now, apart from this particular document, this kind of neatly summarizes some of the learning objectives and other bits, but the awarding organization also issues something called an assignment brief. And I'm just going to kind of relate that here for a minute. Why that is important is because when we look at the assignment brief in particular, the assignment briefs, in terms of, they provide the same tasks and objectives which are provided, on the specification. Just opening that up, Mohammed, so that you're able to see. what tends to happen is that in the Word document, you will normally find a contextual scenario given, that you're assuming that you work for an organization, in a large organization, say for example in the city, and assuming that context, then you start doing the assignment. But sometimes some students or learners actually follow the unit specification. The tasks are pretty much the same. Like, evaluate leadership theories on the PDF document. On the Word document also it says evaluate leadership theories. So, but on the PDF document, one of the key things which is important and kind of helpful at some point in time with the learners is that it gives you an idea in terms of the indicative content of what has to be talked about within that particular task. So when I talk about leadership theories, it gives you an idea. You have to cover and discuss leadership theories like in the great man theory, the contingency theory, the behavioral theories, and those kind of theories have to be covered when you start doing the tasks in terms of a written assignment. So when we go along into this particular course, I normally tend to follow the specification brief because it keeps us kind of on the track, and we discuss things which are pertinent and required to be able to cover that task completely, or at least in a let's say in a proper manner. And this indicative content is not in depth, or it's not very shallow, but it is just the right amount which is suggested by the awarding organization for us to look into, is because I can probably teach and deliver this unit all year long. There's so much to cover in this unit, but from a context of why we are studying, and then some of you have some background and previous qualifications, so the idea is to build on some of the aspects or things like motivation theories, leadership theories that we have studied, from level 4 or, in other forms of our courses that we have done. But what we're going to do is study them in a bit more depth, so we know how to evaluate and apply them in a particular situation. So in the master's level qualification, what we are looking at doing is there might be some areas or some subjects or some topics, frameworks, models we would have studied before, but the idea of understanding them at the level 7 would be to try and apply them in real life situations to understand their implications and how they are effective in getting work done. An example here that I would give you is when we look at motivation theories. Now, we've heard about the Maslow's motivation theory or some of the other motivation theories, but what we want to be able to do is actually at level 7 learn how to do the application of that theory into a particular situation. So Maslow came up with, say, 5 different things, like initial demands are, more of, say, for example, to survive. After the survival, you get into demands which are basically, I want to be known. Then there are demands or, wish list. Then you have wherein I want to be seen within the society. You look at reputation, power, money. So when you look at that motivation, that is how, what we have to look at is how employees join within the organization, at what level they join, what kind of perks and incentives, how they progress into the other levels, and why you see an employee at the age of 40 to 50, between 40 and 50 years, is more bothered about looking at what kind of role, responsibility does it have, the title does it have, rather than just the pay alone, because that is defined using the understanding of how HR department then looks at setting perks and incentives, rewards, type of employee working within the organization. So we'll try and cover some of those concepts, and the idea of briefly explaining that here was that when you do the assignment at some stage, when we complete the unit, you'll have to be clear that if you follow these unit specifications, brief, the PDF document, define it so that we follow certain steps and we know exactly when we are assessing that this has been done, specification brief. But if you follow a context and a scenario given in the assignment brief, which is a Word document, then you specify that in the introduction so that at some stage when we study this, we clearly know that you're following the Word assignment brief. The reason why this is important, which I'm specifying also at this stage, is that in some of the units that you will study, what you will see is that there are tasks which are combined. So you have 1.1, 1.2, and suddenly you'll have 2.1, 2.2, because they are much more relevant in the context which has been defined in the Word document, and that's why they've been clubbed together. So you're not following a chronological order, but you're doing the tasks as the scenario and the activities are laid out in the assignment. But in the assignment specification sheet, you will typically see them, they go in an order of learning outcome 1, task 1.1, 1.2, and then outcome 2, 3, 4, and they go in a chronological order. So sometimes it is easier to know which one are you following and what context, so that the assessment can be done accordingly. And because this is a graded qualification, it is important for us to know this at the start when we get the draft, so that we assess it accordingly and then give you feedback, so that you are able to achieve, higher marks, or, that you desire.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Christian? Is that okay, Mohammed?
Yes. Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, good stuff. Now, very briefly, I'm just going to take 1 second and put the power adapter on before we switch on to our presentation of, understanding an introduction to organization and behavior, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second. Okay, we can start. Right. So sorry about this interruption, but just let's about. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. So this is one of the first, presentations that we have, which is an overview presentation on understanding the unit in general. And I'm just going to click through some of the slides, and we'll discuss some of these slides as we go along. And if you have any questions in the meanwhile, just feel free to ask me, and we'll take them up as we go along. So in the first one, what we're looking at doing is basically looking at understanding, what is actually organization behavior. Now, this particular word, if I have to detail it out, I would kind of break it out into two aspects. One is, the word which is organization, and the other word which is basically to do with, behavior. Now, organization as a word, comes across, from the word organize. And what basically it talks about is how, people generally in the olden times used to organize certain activities, or, certain types of people being grouped together to be able to understand how, you could achieve or do an activity together. And from that aspect, this word, which is organization, came about, which basically meant that at some stage, a group of people with some particular purpose, with a particular objective or a common objective, could together in the form of a business. It could be a, any type of business which is depending on ownership, a private business, a charity, and they could come together with the common objective and work together as a group to be able to achieve an objective, or to be able to achieve some goals, or to work towards a particular mission. And behavior in particular, when you look at the definition of the word behavior, what it basically meant was that at some point in time, when different types of people work together, they work in a specific way wherein they conduct themselves, or they have certain types of actions in which type of actions that they do, and that kind of meant that each individual working within a group had a different kind of a behavior or a way of conducting him or herself, and then working with the others can kind of contributed the word behavior. So when we look at combining the two terms, and when we look at it from a context of business organization, and we look at individuals working within those business organizations, we also look at understanding and bringing together people when you recruit them or when you hire them, so that you are not bringing in somebody who disturbs the apple cart, as we've heard of a term, or you bring in certain types of individuals which can come in and work in harmony within the business. So organization behavior as a study, or as a field, is basically concerned with the study of what type of people bring into the organization, what kind of work can they do, and can they effectively work together with the same, showing the same types of skills, attitudes, and behavior to help the organization achieve certain objectives. Because when you see businesses, or when you see organizations in general, they are all formed from a background of having a certain amount of purpose. And if you have a purpose and a vision or a mission within with the reason why you formed that particular organization, you want like-minded people to come in and work and contribute and effectively contribute, so that the organization is able to then achieve the aims and objectives, or milestones set by the board, by the managing director, whatever it is. So we've looked at one particular situation wherein Robbins, for example, talks about why and how organization is behavior is a study which basically is concerned with what people do in an organization and how their behavior affects the performance of the organization. So he only looks at two parameters in particular in this definition. One is how does the behavior affect the productivity, and what type of people come in and constitute this organization. So if I have to give you an example here, sometimes when you look at organizations which are from the Far East, for example, when we look at Japanese organizations, they are quite hierarchical in structure. The way they have been set up is that there is a hierarchy, and there's a lot of respect and admiration for people who are with experience and at a higher or a senior level. When you look at the American side of organizations, you normally see the organizations to be more or less democratic. Now, how have we done this classification of being hierarchical, democratic, matrix, functional, is by the use of the study of organization behavior, by studying two parameters, which is how groups of individuals are come together and what makes them up, and how do they come together in an organization. And the second is the kind of behavior these individuals exhibit, the workings in the confines of their workings of the organization kind of defines the study of organization behavior. Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Now in terms of when we look at what are we going to study, let's look at the the context in which we are going to study. This is a vast field. At some point in time, organization behavior moves in. It kind of branches off into human resource management. At some point in time, it also branches off into something called the strategic HRM. That means planning and resourcing of people and resources in general within the organization. So what we have to look at is we have to study it from a context of this particular module, which is relevant for this, the level 7 diploma. And we have some learning outcomes which have been given in the awarding organization for us to study the module in this context. So here, when we are looking at is, we are looking at basically considering, four things when we study this particular, aspect. One is we're looking at understanding how organizations come about, what kind of structures they develop, and when the structures are developed, what kind of culture structure has an implication of. Okay. The other bit that we will look at is how people are essentially recruited, selected, and then the motivation techniques and the leadership styles and the management styles that we have to study to be able to understand how organizations currently function. The third aspect that we are going to look at is obviously looking at the behavior of the people which work within the organization, and here we will study some frameworks and theories with regards to leadership styles, management styles, which kind of help us understand the behavior of individuals and then direct them appropriately within the organization. And then last but not the least, we will also study, when we study the culture and the structure of the organization, we will study how they are affected by the external environment when it comes to certain things which are beyond the control of the organization or the business. So when you look at government policies, for example, when you look at employment legislation, these are called external factors because they affect every business, every organization in every sector within a particular geography or within a particular country. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at, briefly. So very briefly looking at, this is an overview of what we are going to be covering. So this presentation primarily looks at, understanding in general what we will be studying within this particular module. Now, there are some interrelated dimensions that we refer to when we look at the study of behavior in particular. The key bits and pieces which are covered in that are basically, one is the individual. So if I have to study behavior, you cannot study behavior of inarticulate things. You have to study behavior of living things. So when we look at behavior and study of behavior, we are looking at basically people in general. And these people in general would be individuals which work within a department, a particular division, or a setup of a business or an organization. We'll also look at
So that's for the reason it is related to the HR section.
That is correct. Yes. So, and the second bit that we will look at will be how does an individual individually, in terms of people individually and people within group, then look at communication. So we will look at ways and mediums in which they do formal communication, informal communication. Sometimes you see groups, or groupings which tend to happen, which are formal. That means a number of employees are put together into a sales and marketing department, or a number of employees are put into a HR department. This is called formal groupings because these set of individuals have a particular experience, a particular expertise, and they then are put together into a department to provide a particular type of service. And sometimes you work within groups which are informal, and these informal groupings could be that the company is probably launching a new product, and what they tend to do is for that particular project, which is the launch of a new product, the company will put together an informal group. That means you'll have a marketing manager, a project manager, a finance manager, and people from different departments working together for the fulfillment of that particular objective. And to understand this group dynamics, when sometimes they are formed informally for a certain amount of time or for a particular project, we will also look at understanding how this works, and how does the individual behavior of how does the behavior of individual people affect the group task or the project which has been given. And if I just enlarge this, so we've started off with one particular individual, we've gone to a group, and if I expand this into an organization or across the full organization, then what we will do is we will look at the impact of how structure and different types of structures, within the organization, like matrix, functional, hierarchical, structured. These kind of structures we will study, and how these structures come about, and how these structures then come and lead to the creation of a culture within the organization, and then how does the behavior of an individual also get affected when they work within a certain type of structure within the organization. And to put all this into a mix, what we are looking at is basically, the factors which influence the working of the entire structure, certain factor which influence the working of certain, say for example, the culture within the organization, the whole company as a whole, would be things like how much of technology is currently employed. Do you have system procedures within the organization? Some part of it could be to do with government legislation, and then also if you are an organization which works across multiple geographies or countries, then how does the law and legislation or economic activity of other countries and other things affect the working of an organization? So when we look at an example, maybe at a later stage of organizations like Apple, Google, Microsoft, you will see that these companies work across geographies, across a lot of countries. And here they have informal groups, they have divisions, they have type of structures. So when you look at Apple, for example, they have a very hierarchical structure across different countries. But when we look at, for example, Microsoft, they have a very functional productized structure. So they define their business divisions as cloud computing, Xbox or gaming, search or Bing, or tablets or Surface and things like that. So different organizations have different things, but they are all able to accomplish their aims and objectives of increasing sales, achieving profitability, gaining market share, and that is all of the dynamics that we need to be able to understand, within this context of organization and behavior. Now, if I just minimize this for a second and I go back into Moodle, what I'm going to try and do is basically pick up, leadership theory, as a presentation, because this presentation kind of, is an overarching presentation of the whole unit. Rather than go into it right now to look at an overview, which I've already done kind of, and you can go through some of the slides. We'll refer to this presentation time and again as we start the sessions. But let's look at the pertinent, topic of how to understand, for example, the first topic which talks about, evaluate leadership theory. So let's look at certain things which are related to this particular topic, which is leadership. So how do you define leadership? What is leadership? Have you seen, so have you, say, for example, in the context, seen what is leadership?
Actually, it's a style or is a way of the leading the other person or your group of people and show them the way to achieve a specific goal or target.
So I think there are, let's look at, yes, you're correct, Mohammed, in that, but let's look at, say, for example, starting, say, from a little bit of a more basic, let's look at what is the definition of leadership. There are some terms that we've heard over the years, that you are an effective leader or you are an effective manager. So we will look at, approaching it from that aspect in terms of understanding what is leadership. So leadership is, as you rightly said, what is leader? Leader is basically certain actions that you do which kind of reflect or differentiate you from others, and because of these actions that you take, or you're able to organize people and resources in a fashion wherein then people start to follow you, is the aspect of being a leader. And that quality or that skill at some stage when you exhibit time and again becomes leadership. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we look at particular side of the definition of leadership, what we also look at is there are other types of things which then go hand in hand with this quality of leadership, which is things like you sometimes look at you look up to people for guidance, you look up to people for direction. You also at some point in time look at people sometime with people of authority. That means you have certain powers or responsibilities which, when executed, put you into an authoritative position or in a controlling position. And in some cases, when I relate this to the organization, the person who has authority, command, has the ability to guide or direct or basically control resources, whether it's human resources, physical resources, financial resources, or technological resources within an organization, is generally seen to be within the management position, because that person has a certain amount of clout, that person has a certain amount of let's put it this way, depth in terms of working within that organization. It could be because of experience, because of stake, or it is. So when we look at these traits and when we look at these qualities, what we tend to see is that you will find people who are able to lead a group of people and are able to influence the actions of some of the individuals within the organization are generally classified as being in a leader, are generally classified as leaders, or are be as in a leadership position. So in terms of literally, an example here would be that sometimes you see within organizations there are different sales managers, or you see different managers within the organization which do the same task. So if you are a big if you're working within a big organization like Microsoft, a marketing manager within the UK geography might be doing the same type of job, which is a marketing manager in a particular else geography, say for example China. But when you look at differentiation between the two, they might be doing the same type of tasks or jobs, but you will see that at some stage, if one of the sales manager or marketing managers is able to achieve a higher market share within that geography or the country, would start to get a bit more, credence or bit more preference as within the organizational structure, because he's able to accomplish maybe higher goals, or he's able to accomplish higher revenues or higher market share. And that then puts him into a bit of a leadership position. Can you correlate to that?
Yeah, that's
Tristan, are you able to correlate to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we look at is, in some cases, when we look at understanding this concept of leadership, what we will do is we will then relate it to certain types of theories or frameworks which have been put together in the past, and they then kind of help you to understand and relate to these kind of situations in the organization. And what we are going to look at is, under the leadership concept, we are going to look at some of the theories which have been over the years firmed up, researched, and they have now kind of been understood and accepted by widely accepted, obviously in the society. So some of the leadership theories that we will look at would be theories like the great man theory. We will look at the trait leadership theory. We'll also look at certain other types of theories like behavioral theories. There are lots of them. There are about, I think 8 or 10 of them, but we'll also briefly look at, the path goal theory. We'll look at some sort of, structural theories. So these theories or frameworks have originated over the years as and when the time or the era has changed. So when you look at the great man theory in particular, was a theory of leadership which was primarily identified, I would say in the early 19th century. Now, this particular theory was, an idea which originated obviously in the early 19th century, and was proposed under the aspect of that sometimes you would see certain type of people, they have a kind of a larger impact in terms of having worked within that role as compared to other people, and this is then seen to be a type of a fact which kind of let's put it this way, gave rise to people having, he's a farmer and he's a son of a farmer, so he's a scientist, he's a son of a scientist, he's a doctor, his son could be a doctor. So what they basically said was, they looked at the aspect of having leadership traits or skills which could have been inherited or a person could be born with, and that is what the original discussion on the great man theory came about in the early 19th century. Is that maybe the Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle basically predicted, saying that some people are born with certain types of qualities and they are born to be leaders, and those are aspects which over a point in time did not turn out to be true. So the great man theory was quite valid, and valid within an era of the 1800s to 1900, came about with the aspect that at that point in time, the modernization, it was pre-industrialization when it came about, and people tended to believe that there are certain types of people which are born with certain types of traits and skills, or they have it within their genes, and that is why they then turn out to be leaders. Now, this particular concept obviously was argued about, and I think it turned in the early 20th century, and it led to the discussions and frameworks of other theories which came about. So the great man theory went into something called the trait leadership theory, and again here the example was that sometimes they believe that the person is born with the ability to be able to lead or have that particular responsibility, and that is why This was something which was identified in the early 1930s to 40s, and it spoke about the terminologies that leaders are born with talent, and these leadership traits rather than created. So in that particular era, when we are studying, what we did see was that leadership was primarily seen to be a, 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 a trait which you were either born with or you were not having. Either you had it or you didn't have it, and if you had it, you were born with this trait and you were born to kind of lead. And this particular theory then talked about certain traits and factors. They were identified by the authors, and it talked about 16 different traits. And then if you had those traits, you were basically given that position to be able to work or lead a particular department, organization, whatever it is. Now, this was the initial classification when they started to look at the concept of leadership in the early 18th, 19th century. And we have examples of this in the past, going back to Napoleon and in the earlier part of the time as well. But the idea of understanding here is this then concept led to the creation of something called different type of theories, which were like behavioral theories. And here, at some point in time, there was technology which came about, which talked about that there are some mental and social characteristics which are depicted by individuals, and these characteristics, when are depicted by individuals, basically talk about certain types of behaviors, and these behaviors are then depicted by the leaders. And that is why these theories were then characterized into something called task oriented, people oriented. And that is why the concept of behavior came about, that if you are very good in achieving certain tasks, you are seen to be a task oriented leader. And if you are able to understand people, their psychology, and get them to do the work for you, or get them to align behind a particular aim and objective, this then was considered to be a type of leadership wherein you were exhibiting a behavior that led to the understanding that you are people concerned, you are kind of empathetic, you are understanding of the people's needs and requirement, and that person was termed as a people's leader, or somebody who was popularly chosen because he was concerned about the well-being of people. And that is where it came about from a behavioral context, and people classified him as not being task oriented but being people oriented. And these were some of the first findings when more research was done, and then this led to the creation of certain type of modern theories that we kind of now see and read and kind of use, which were things like the grid model that we looked at. And in that grid model, at some stage, Blake and Moulton, the authors who worked on this, and kind of came up with this particular model in the early 1960s, after the industrialization, after the post World War II era, talked about that there are people who work, and obviously work with the aspect of having a balanced concern for the people, but also are concerned about the results the organization or the business or the organization needs to achieve. And that grid model which they came up with was then was coined as the grid model. And here in the grid model, it talked about having a balanced approach in terms of being sensitive to the needs and requirements of the people which work within the organization, but also being sensitive enough to ensure that you could use people as a resource to make sure that you accomplish the goals and objectives of the organization. And they were concerned about the results which needed to be achieved. And that led to some of the other theories that we will also look at, things like the McGregor theory, the X and Y theory, which came about. And the reason why it came about was because the grid, you could plot some of these characteristics and skills which people exhibit into a particular grid. Grid helped you to understand what kind of leader that person was, and why in that particular situation that person was effective or not effective. So in certain cases, going further, what we looked at is that these theories have then been adapted and adopted in different type of forms, and they are then available. They have then over the years been, they have evolved into what we see is something called the modern theories, or the modern classification of theories. And one such classification is what we're going to look at is these types, which is things like prescribed leaders. That means we are looking at leaders who are able to work because they get appointed their prior experience. So an example here would be when you look at the football coaches within the organization. So here, for example, when you look at Jose Mourinho, who's the football manager for Manchester United, or you look at Pep Guardiola, who's the manager for Manchester City. Now, when you look at these names in particular, they are prescribed leaders is because they've done this, they've done that, they've been successful footballers themselves. At some stage, they've got to a position wherein they are able to now manage, direct, and work as managers to be able to get those results which they've achieved when they were players themselves. And they are then classified as people who are kind of prescribed leaders because they have the experience and they have the knowledge and the know-how to work within that role to carry out the desired objectives of the chairman or the board of the organization and achieve those objectives with appropriate resources which are provided. The other type of leaders that we look at, the other type of classification that we look at is leaders who are called emergent leaders, those who achieve leadership, by gaining respect and support from the group. So, for example, when you look at sticking to the context of only, when you look at David Beckham, for example, now captains of the team, they get formed, or somebody attains a captain position of a captain within a football team, is because they enjoy the respect, support of their team members, and those then are termed as maybe as emergent leaders. So because of the performance they show, because of the motivation, or because of the passion they show, support, or the understanding they have of their fellow players, then gives them the admiration and the respect, or earns them the admiration and the respect of their fellow team players, and it then kind of propels that person or pushes that person into some sort of a leadership position. They obviously are one of the players, and they, within that being one of the players, then can achieve a position which is a captain's position. There's a difference between prescribed and emergent leaders is because that is where you have established experience and you have the authority and you're seen to have that clout in terms of experience to get into that position. But in the emergent case, wherein you being a part of the team, you are differentiating yourself because you're performing better than other players, and they look up to you. You achieve or kind of assume the captaincy position, and that is where the leaders or the type of classification is called as emergent leaders. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, in general, when we were talking about the theories, I think when we look at study in terms of background study, different types, as I briefly looked at, there's trade, which is based on the basis of some skills that you're born with, or traits that you're born with, and people assume that you could be in that position, and those were trait theories. If you depict certain type of behaviors, whether you're people oriented, task oriented, there are 6 different types of leadership styles, which recently was discussed within the Harvard magazine, Harvard Business Review, and they talked about 6 different styles which were basis, some sort of behavior the individuals actually exhibit. And it's a good read, which I'm going to try and send it to you after the session today, would be to look at this to understand what are the 6 styles identified after a bit of research in the modern context. And they were quite if I can have it somewhere, I'll probably pick it up on the screen. Just give me a second. And they were the 6 different tiles which talked about, are you a pace setter? Are you a democratic leader? But it was an amalgamation of a lot of these, previous theories or frameworks which have come out in the past. And it basically had a bit of a modern stint on the types of, leadership styles that you get to see, or the type of bosses that you get to see. And they were types like visionary. They were types like coach. You could be a coach, you could be a visionary, you exhibit certain skills and behaviors for that. You could be an affiliative boss, you could be a democratic boss, you could be a commander, you could be a pace setter. And these 6 different styles came about. And what somebody did a bit of a research was they tried to look at these 3 different types of leadership theory and try to arrive at a modern approach of what is actually applicable in the modern day organizations. And this is something which is a good read, and I'm going to try and send you some sort of a schematic of that, which is a very brief schematic, which basically talks about the 6 leadership styles according to a psychologist, Daniel Goleman. And he basically together the three different main leadership theories and has created these styles which kind of fit with the modern day organization today. And the interactional approach is basically talking about theories like path goal theory, the leadership, leader member exchange theory, wherein, for example, here what they talked about was the directive leaders are much more efficient because they are able to give feedback and are able to give direction in terms of where the organization needs to move. There are supportive leaders which support the objectives which the organization needs to achieve, but they are very true in their delegation. That means they delegate quite a lot and they are seen to be only managing rather than having the control in terms of achieving the goals and objectives. And on the other hand, when we look at the leader member exchange theory suggested by Luther, and it talks about that leadership as a concept now, leaders are under a lot of pressure to be able to be seen as somebody who is more efficient, more productive, has more has more of the ideas, and that has a direct bearing on what type of groups or groupings they are able to command or work with. And that is where sometimes you get to see that if there are projects being launched in the organization, sometimes the management would choose a person who has managed some of those projects in the past and has successfully achieved the objectives, rather than a person which has more seniority or more experience, could have been overlooked. But because of the fact that what they look at is important under the interactional approach to try and fit the best person with the experience and expertise to be able to complete that project as against the person with seniorities and experience which has delivered things in the past. So these, three different types of theories basically led to, different approaches. But if you look analyzing them in the modern day context, what you will normally see is that we also at some point in time, talk about, these are slides which talk about this, but we are basically looking at, a type of an approach wherein they expect the leaders to be approachable. They expect leaders or people in the leadership position to be understanding in terms of understanding the requirements of, the organization. At the same point in time, understanding the requirements of people which work within the teams or people which work within the organization to be able to help achieve that objective. Because it is very clear after the World War II and the post-modernization era, one of the clear things which came about, and it is a very, very new, department of study, is human resources. So what was realized at that time was that as modernization took place, as industrialization happened, and a lot of people actually went from agriculture working into factories and, the mechanized working, it came about that human resource managing of people within the organization became a very important function. And this is relatively a very new subject area which is come across only in the modern day science because of the industrialization as a process in the society. So the interactional approach became important is because it kind of amalgamated the trait and the behavioral approach into a merged kind of an approach of saying you need to be people oriented, you need to be task oriented, but you need to balance the two to be able to achieve the organizational objectives. And that is where some leaders then are seen to be having the mixed approach are preferred within organizations because they are not seen to be too strong or too kind of aligned in one tangential position when they get into the leadership position. Is that okay?
Yes.
Is that clear enough? And what I'm going to do is, obviously, in our discussion, we are literally going into something which is, looking at some of these from a, I would say, practical point of view rather than a theoretical point of view. So when I send you a handout, in the email after the session, what you will get to see is that you will get to read some of these theories in a bit more detail, which is in 2 or 3 paragraphs, the background, the historical background, and how these theories came about, for you to be able to look at the structure of the assignment as well. Okay, what we are looking at covering is the evaluation bit of how these theories actually fit in today in the modern day context and why they have been, why they are considered as important within the context of organization behavior, because organization is nothing but a group of individuals, and these group of individuals are nothing but the a certain type of behavior, and this behavior needs to be controlled, and this behavior needs to be kind of channeled into a particular direction to be able to achieve the organizational aim and objectives. Okay?
Yeah.
Good stuff. So what we're going to do is obviously stop here for today in terms of today's session, and then maybe in the next session what I'm going to do is start out with a bit of a recap of what we covered, and what we'll do is we'll go into a bit more detail looking at the other types of let's put it this way, things which we need to now look at is, after understanding the concept of leadership, what we want to be able to do is differentiate that slightly with what is management, managerial styles, and what is the difference between a leader and a manager. And then that is where we will study certain type of management theories to get an overarching understanding of management. And then we will summarize the first learning outcome in the next session, looking at leadership styles, management styles, and in which situations we use these two terms, and how to look at these two terms from an aspect of using it within the organization. Sometimes a person has to be in a leadership position than in a managerial position, and sometimes you have to be a manager but not seen to be in a leadership position. So we'll study that with an example. Okay?
Yeah.
Good stuff. So absolutely look out for an email which I'll send you, which will have a bit more detail in terms of reading that you could do to understand the first learning outcome, which is we've touched on briefly, which is the leadership and leadership theories. And then we will take this up with regards to, if you have any questions or queries, you can come back to me on email, and then I will try my level best to basically give you some additional reading material or answer your queries.
Yeah, sure.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for today's session. Any questions, any comments from you, Mohammed, first?
So far it's fine. Once I will look into the document, and then I will let you know about
That's fine. Okay. Are you okay with the pace of delivery? Is in terms of delivery, in terms of speed and pace is okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Good stuff. Kristen?
Yeah.
Are you okay with the pace and delivery in terms of, are you able to understand? Are the examples okay? Any questions or queries so far?
Everything's all right.
Okay, good stuff. And let me send that across to you in a couple of minutes, and then we'll catch up on this session next week. Now, what we're going to do is, obviously, there are about 10 or 11 students which are supposed to join the session. So sometimes if you don't join the session or are unable to join, I know, Mohammed, you've accepted all the 4 invites, but sometimes if you change and you're not able to join because of XYZ reason, then maybe do a decline on that invite so that we know that who's going to attend, who's not in the session, and you'll have a copy of the recording forwarded to you, along with the presentation or handout sent out in the email. So you can watch it later.
So I can change the status anytime, yeah?
Yeah, you can do that, yes. The other thing which I wanted to say is that, for the first 1 or 2 weeks, what we're going to do is obviously do 1 session a week, and that is going to be Thursdays. But as we go along and as you become comfortable with the usage of the software join.me, and you're comfortable with the time and the delivery that we're doing, some of these sessions I'm going to kind of, squeeze down in terms of time. Like today, we've spent about an hour, maybe 10 minutes or something like that, but they might go down slightly, and we will increase this session, not just have 1, but we'll have 2 in a week.
Yeah, no problem, yeah.
Is that okay? And
I
would kind of, request some feedback on would be that for me to tailor my delivery would be to look at, if I'm going in, if you are understanding the brief and the topics quite well, do you want me to go in a bit more detail? Do you want more theoretical concepts to be covered, or do you want more practical concepts to be covered? And if you give me some sort of a direction in terms of what your learning style is, I would prefer in the email would be much better. There is something which is going to be emailed to you today after the session, or I'll ask one of my colleagues to email that to you, would be a learning style questionnaire, which is the WARC model questionnaire. It's a few multiple choice questions. You will receive that as an email and a link which will take you to a Google form. And if you fill that up, what it will give me some idea would be that what is the preferred of your learning. From the questions that you answer, I'll be able to pick that up, and I'll try and see if I can tailor the teaching and delivery in that style so that it is much more, approachable and much more conducive for you to be able to learn from what I'm, trying to put across on the seminars.
Yeah, sure. So,
Okay. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, Mohammed.
yeah. So, this all the lectures will be available on the, the
Moodle.
learning platform. Yeah.
Yes, they will be available.
Yeah, sure.